was serious death or disability of the person. There, that part of the body might be removed. And so, with regard to amputation of a diseased limb, for most of history, amputation was essentially the only thing that surgeons knew how to do. They could put bones back together, but generally surgeons did not go into bodily cavities. They did no surgery in the internal organs. They didn't do surgery in the brain, obviously, until very recently. But they were pretty good at chopping off arms and legs. And so the question was it legitimate to amputate a leg or an arm that was a threat to the body? And Cardinal de Lugo and subsequent theologians, and in fact Thomas Aquinas several centuries earlier had mentioned a principle of totality. That is, the integrity of the body could be invaded and impaired only if that impairment would then contribute to the totality of the organism itself. So the principle of totality allowed an amputation or allowed the impairment of any function only if it contributed to the health of the body as a whole. That was the general view that prevailed at the time the organ transplantation was beginning to develop. And obviously, it made it very difficult to see organ transplantation in a moral light under those conditions. But this was not just a problem for Catholic moral theologians. It was a problem for surgeons. Internationally, conscientious surgeons who were engaged in transplant research worried about its ethics. The great Dr. John Murray, who did the first kidney transplants, was concerned because he said the ethics of surgery simply have always forbidden the invasion of a healthy body. So when I cut into a healthy body and take out a healthy kidney in order to put it in someone else, I'm violating the ethics of my profession. He did it and attempted to pursue it very vigorously, but he consciously stated that it was a cause of moral trouble to him. Similarly, the law internationally saw mutilation as a criminal act. And as Lord Kilbrandon, the Lord Chief Justice of England, said at a large conference on transplantation in 1962, one cannot consent to be maimed. So even if you give your consent to have a kidney removed, that is a maiming which is illegal. So the Catholic moral theologians, physicians and surgeons, the law, and many others were concerned about the morality of something which, on the face of it, appeared to be a very beneficent act. Now, at that time, of course, in the 60s, since transplantation still remained highly experimental, one could say, well, and of course the other reason is that it's taking a huge risk because you're just as likely to die with your transplant as without it. The moral theologians then were almost universally negative about transplantation in those first decades. And they referred largely to a papal statement. There was a very common reference to the encyclical of Pope Pius XI, Casti Connubii, on Christian marriage, which had appeared in 1930. And in that encyclical, the Pope strongly condemns mutilation in the following words. He says, "Public authorities have no power over the bodily members of their subjects, and therefore, in the absence of any crime calling for corporal punishment, the public authorities may never injure or attack the integrity of the body on any ground, eugenic or otherwise, The individual human being has no power over the members of his own body, except as he uses them for their natural purpose. He cannot destroy or mutilate them, except there be no other way of providing for the welfare of the body as a whole. So Pope states there the principle of divine dominion over the body and the principle of totality, which is the one exception allowing a mutilation only to preserve the whole body itself. Now, why is a statement like that in a document on Christian marriage? The reason is that in 1930, the eugenics movement was still a powerful movement in the world. This is before its application by the Nazis. Through the 1900s, from 1900, a little before 1900 on, the eugenic sterilization movement had swept across Western culture. California was in the forefront. California, in the state of California in 1912, passed eugenic sterilization laws, which provided for the castration, male and female castration, removal of testicles and ovaries, for any person released from a mental hospital. So if you had been put in a mental hospital, and if you were going to be released back into the world, the public authorities were allowed to go ahead with eugenic sterilization so that once back in the world, you would not reproduce your own kind. Namely, to use the term that was popular at the time, the feeble-minded. This was a highly acceptable public position in the United States. Many major public figures were in favor of it. President Teddy Roosevelt was a strong eugenic promoter. David Starr Jordan, the first president of Stanford University, California's most distinguished educator, was in favor of eugenic sterilization. And the eugenic sterilization laws, as written in California, were so nicely drafted that they were simply imported to Germany. And the German sterilization laws passed after the Nazi regime took power in 1933 were California statutes. So the Pope is referring to the problem of eugenic sterilization. And he, as you may notice, he starts the passage by saying public authorities have no power over the bodily members of their subjects. And then goes on to state the individual principle of dominion. The individual human being has no power over the members of his or her own body. So the Catholic theologians, faced with the development of organ transplantation, look back and see this strong papal statement, and they see it as a statement of the principles of dominion and the principles of totality, and they say organ transplantation simply is not morally acceptable, can't be done. A second problem influences the moral theologians, namely the problem that arose when it was discovered that Nazi scientists had experimented on prisoners in the concentration camps during World War II. The Nuremberg trials in 1947 revealed the terrible episodes of widespread scientific experimentation on totally abject subjects who had no possible power of refusing to cooperate.